2022. And this will be number 4. So, at this point, we are taking a deep dive into an area that we have avoided as much as possible in the history of our project here, which obviously goes back more than 28 years. And that is getting into some kind of pure examination of the product of those involved. We're doing it because it's relevant. That is, I've never done a monologue where I listen to one of, Courtney Love's or David Grohl's albums and did a review. We're not padding the project out in that way, believe me. But we do have to engage in some form of rock journalism at this point because of this idea that, there are messages in these songs and they speak to the motives of the parties involved. And there are aspects of the career of David Grohl that are just never discussed. I mean, when the band was first formed in '95, I remember reading the reviews, and obviously people were saying that, he's doing a Nirvana-like project, trying very deliberately to capitalize on the Nirvana style. But generally, it was his first record was well received, and he has received support from critics throughout his career. Although, to give you the gist of how I feel and how I feel any honest critic would feel about the output, they've put out 10 albums now, and one reviewer used the word inconsequential, metal rock. It doesn't seem to be consequential in it all, in the way of what you would expect from such an artist, which is to give the audience a variety and an ongoing series of interesting concepts in songwriting and song performing. In fact, what we'd really like to point out here that no one has ever said that I know of is that David Grohl, just like some hacky old band from the 70s or, a new wave band from the 80s or whatever, leans very, very heavily on his original material in, his concert career of the last 27 years. And so, in order to demonstrate this, there's a website called Setlist FM that appears to do accurate compilations of set lists. That is what the bands really play when they're on tour for each and every concert. And so there's an enumeration of all of the Foo Fighters material as played in concert over apparently the last 27 years. And here's the bottom line statistic that we're getting into here. Of the top 20 songs that are played by the Foo Fighters in concert, 10 of them are from the first and second LP. I mean, this guy is playing Freebird for the last 28 years, 27 years. In fact, 90s. So here are the top 4. And now, and be aware that it's not as if the Foo Fighters were doing a whole lot of touring in their first couple of years, and that accounts for the discrepancy between the numbers of the early songs and the later songs. He's just leaning heavily on this material. Everlong played almost 1,100 times. Monkey Wrench played almost 1,000 times. My Hero played almost 1,000 times. This Is a Call played almost 1,000 times. So those are, 3 of those are from the second record, and This Is a Call is from the first record. The 10th most performed song, Big Me, 610 performances. That's from the first record. Stacked Actors. That's actually, that one is not part of that set. But I'll Stick Around, 480 performances. That's from the first record. For All the Cows. That's from the first record. Hey Johnny Park. That's from the second record. Up in Arms from the second record. Alone and Easy Target, number 20, performed 330 times. That's from the first record. And the reason I have notes on Stacked Actors is you have to realize that, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of anyone who looks at these things with a keen eye, you'll notice that this material is all referential to Mr. Grohl's thought processes and attitudes and mythologizing the grand soap opera of his life, which is, I was just this young pud knocker that loved to play drums, and I got into the biggest band in the world at the time, and then it all came crashing down. I just have so much to write about and so much on my mind about that I'm going to sing about it for the next 27 years and beyond. And of course, the strange thing now is he's been denying that this is all about Cobain for the last going on 3 decades. But now he gets a big reboot, because now he can regurgitate all of this sentimentality that he had for Cobain and direct it at Taylor Hawkins. In fact, he can follow Paul McCartney's example this year, his good buddy Paul McCartney, very close associate, who started projecting John Lennon on a screen behind him, singing I've Got a Feeling. In fact, he started doing this in Spokane this year, and then for Grohl's first appearance after Taylor Hawkins' death, he went over to England and performed with Paul McCartney, while McCartney did it again. And McCartney's explanation for this is, wow, how could I resist doing a duet with him? Right? Oh, he's resisted for the last 40 years plus. Why didn't he keep resisting, you know? These guys, Lennon and McCartney, you know, despite the hyphen between their names and the presumed co-authorship of these songs that many people assume, which is every Beatles scholar says that's incorrect, they really almost entirely wrote separately. These guys hated each other. They hated each other with a passion. Obviously. It may be that they only met once after 1970. Although, you know, McCartney, I believe, is the source of a story that the Lennons, you know, John and Yoko, invited him over to the apartment with his wife for a nice intimate dinner or something at one point, but I don't think Johnny ever made any statement to that effect. And, you know, we can go through all these lyrics, but, you know, you can do this yourself as well, which is Big Me. This is I discussed this in the earlier edition here. When I talk about it, carries on, I could stand to prove Big Me to talk about it. When he sings Big Me, it sounds a lot like Beg Me to talk about it. And, you know, he's been in literally hundreds of, you know, press junket type interviews with radio stations and all of that. I would imagine it runs into the hundreds. And he uses this phrase all the time, talk about it. When it gets around to talking about Cobain's tragedy or his relations with CLC the widow or anything else pertaining to Nirvana, but especially Cobain's death, talk about it. This is the phrase that just keeps coming up straight out of the song. And you knew in 1995 when this came out, this is exactly what he's talking about. This is exactly what's going to be the guy's marketing strategy, presumably for the rest of his career. Talking about it or not talking about it, or getting people to beg him to talk about it. Right? This is a call from the first album, Ritalin is easy, Ritalin is good. Even all the ones that watered down the daughter. So, he's talking about Ritalin abuse and pharmaceutical abuse among the daughter, children. That's Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain is the public figure who's most associated with the drug Ritalin, I would say. And then, there are these denials of Mr. Grohl's involvement in any kind of political point of view that are there in the first couple of albums. Monkey Wrench. Don't want to be your monkey wrench. One more indecent accident. I'd rather leave than suffer this. I'll never be your monkey wrench. What do you do when all your enemies are friends? Now and then I'll try to bend under pressure, wind up snapping in the end. I mean, this term almost belongs on Cobain's death certificate. Suicide unexplained, he snapped. I mean, that's the term that's applied to people who do that when there's no real seeming explanation for it. Well, he must have snapped. So how could he possibly deny that he's writing about Cobain over and over and over again? And everybody knows what monkey wrench is. Monkey wrench is what we Yanks say to approximate the British phrase, spanner in the works. A monkey wrench, think of Charlie Chaplin in modern times. Running the big machine, having that big wrench in his hand. Spanner in the works. John Lennon's second book was called A Spaniard in the Works. There was a wrench on the cover, along with, I guess it's supposed to be a cartoon of Lennon himself in a Spanish-type hat. Everybody knows what I don't want to be your monkey wrench is. It means he's not going to get involved in politics. And then the other big video that came out in that first year was called I'll Stick Around. And everybody, this was the one that people latched onto, saying, how can he possibly deny that this is about Cobain, although has he ever even once admitted it? I thought I knew all it took to bother you. Every word I said was true, and that you'll see. How could it be that I'm the only one who sees your rehearsed insanity? Yeah. So this is obviously rehearsed insanity is directed at Courtney Love, as others have observed. It really couldn't be addressed at anyone else. He's actually putting chess pieces into his mouth in this video, and he's hopping up and down, and there's sort of this virus-looking thing hovering over them, which explodes at the end, like Cobain's skull exploded, right? Supposedly. I mean, it didn't really, but that was officially his cause of death, at least for the first 6 weeks, before we got it straight with the ME, and then they, changed it to penetrating wound only. But, it's weird that it's the virus, and some people, possibly the band itself, has referred to this floating orb as like an HIV virus. And there was this rumor going around that perhaps Cobain had killed himself because of HIV infection, although even certainly at that time it was known that it was a survivable illness. This is 1994, not 1984. And this is worth mentioning just in passing that my recollection is that it was Dr. Hartshorn himself, in conversation with me, mentioned this thing about, well, some people kill themselves these days because they have an HIV infection and they are overcome with grief about that. Why was this guy, this is the person who signed the death certificate? What a completely bizarre and irresponsible thing to say in terms of rumor mongering. But right there on the phone, the guy was mongering rumor right at me. And I believe at that point I interrupted him and said, "You're not possibly conveying any sense that you have knowledge or a belief that he was HIV positive, are you?" And according to my recollection at this moment, I would say he immediately denied that. But the mongering was happening, folks. There's no doubt about that. From the guy who signed the death certificate. And of course, this is the song, I don't owe you anything, I don't owe you anything, I don't owe you anything, I don't owe you anything. I've had no hand in your ever-desperate plan. I should have known we were better off alone. I've taken all and I've endured. I'll stick around and learn from all that came from it. And we can go through each of these, although perhaps this would be more appropriate to a studio-type presentation when I'm not battling with all this automobile exhaust and literally, I'm sure 1,000 cars have gone by, plus buses and motorcycles, etc., in the last hour. Alone and Easy Target, She's Not Always Fun, which seems to reference both The Widow and also the supposed suicide note, wherein 100% Fun was referenced. For All the Cows, I'm called a cow, but I'm not about to blow it now. For all the cows. The cow is you, the cow is you. And, this seems to be referential to Alfred Hitchcock having referred either to the audience or actors. I believe it was actors that he referred to as cows. But perhaps that was a denial. It doesn't really make sense that you refer to actors as cows when you see the audience filing in lines like livestock to the slaughter, right, over and over again. But if Hitchcock did ever say that, he was wise to try to walk it back and say that as a director he's allowed to disrespect actors in certain ways, and certainly Hitchcock did do that. I think he boinked a lot of his leading ladies, according to rumor or legend. And so it's obvious what the cow is. Now Nirvana was referred to as the cash cow for Sub Pop Records, and so he's denying that he was the cow. The cow is the audience, and he's not about to blow it for the cows, which essentially means complaining about politics or complaining about the way that his dear friend Kurt Cobain died. And there are others on this top 20 list, like Stacked Actors. This is not from the first two records, but the third or fourth. Many people have commented this must refer to Courtney Love. I'm impressed with a beautiful chest. One more for hire, a wonderful liar. I think it's time we should all come clean. Stacked Dead Actors, stacked to the rafters. Line up the bastards, all I want is the truth. Hey, hey now, you can take it, and we cry when they all die blonde. Your teary eyes, your famous disguise, never knowing who to believe. When you're just another aging drag queen. Well, Grohl has had a famously hard time breaking into the movies. Courtney Love broke into the movies in a fairly big way, although ultimately it never really amounted to much, but was featured in several major motion pictures and did get a Golden Globe Award nomination. And I believe the New York Critics Circle, is that what it's called? I believe she actually won that one and attended the ceremony with, oddly enough, Mr. Oliver Stone, famous film director. But Grohl never made it into the movies, and his only featured role, as far as I know, was the role of Satan in, I think it's called Tenacious D, the Pick of Destiny. And obviously David Grohl's strange association with Satan rock for comedy is well established, with this being his only film role. And, it's technically impressive, not really funny, particularly because he really crosses a serious comedy line in that appearance, and so do the Tenacious D Boys in this feature film, because basically they get into what they call a rock-off, which is a quaint Wayne's World kind of concept with Satan, and the stakes are taking Kyle, the secondary guy in the Tenacious D band. Grohl is going to take him to hell, where he will be his bitch, and then they clearly enact that the underlying joke here is that if the boys lose the rock off, Kyle is going to be raped for all eternity by this 12-foot satanic David Grohl. I gotta say, that's crossing a line. Certainly you would have never seen the Spinal Tap band crossing, getting into violent rape as the underlying premise for an extended joke. I wasn't laughing. Was anyone? And then one coincidence, perhaps, which is unfortunate, is they get into a rock-off wherein the Tenacious D Boys are going to rock your socks off. Which, sadly enough, is the language that Mr. Hawkins' wife used in promoting the concert the two concerts that were to occur last month in September. She said her husband was always dedicated to rocking your socks off. She could use a better publicist. Anyway, this is an interesting quotation before we get into this other bit about Everlong. The Foo Fighters record, this is David Grohl, quote, "The Foo Fighters record was not meant to be an album. It was an experiment and for fun. I was just fucking around. Some of the lyrics weren't even real words." This is David Grohl in the year 2011. Well, what an absurd falsehood to put forward. This record was as slick as anything that Nirvana came up with in terms of slickness. And yet the claim is that David Grohl, who had never recorded anything with Nirvana except one song, which is called Marigold, which he finally performed, 12 12 years after, it's pretty obvious the guy is playing 3 movable chords. Rudimentary guitar at best. Go into a guitar shop and playing that and saying you want a lesson, they're going to flatter you and say, yeah, you're at the intermediate level, moving that identical chord shape in 3 positions as you sing this Marigold song, which is creepy in itself. It's the lyrics are, he's there in case I want it all. He's scared 'cause I want it all. I mean, given the takeover of the band, or given the takeover of the Nirvana concept by David Grohl, what a curious thing for him to have written, which he apparently wrote back in 1992, obviously while already in Nirvana, and he did record it on a limited release, for a limited release cassette. But try to find a bit of guitar, a bit of videotape where David Grohl is rocking out on guitar prior to, his premiere about a half mile over that way on Mercer Street in 1996. I don't think that such video exists. So it could be one of those Bernie pretty purdy sort of situations where, gosh, no one actually saw him playing these songs. Supposedly he was in this state of shock and depression after Cobain died, but I believe the official version is that the first Foo Fighters record was actually recorded mostly by October of 1994. Oh, really? You mean just 6 months afterward? After he began the band, while he was going through the state of depression or whatever, and again, it was not meant to be an album, I was just fucking around, he says. And I bring this up because Grohl says he really hates writing or does not like writing at all. And, if this was the 70s, there might be some speculation among rock journos that this is all written by J. Walter Thompson, man. You got Don Draper and some of his Lucky Strike smoking buddies sitting around in their luxury offices in Manhattan coming up with this stuff. Another on the top 20 is All My Life. Feeling that I feel the most, feel it come to life when I feel your ghost. You hear that on the radio, and you know that he's singing about Kurt Cobain. Like so many of these, Learn to Fly. He led through the, do I even have that one? Let's see. Oh yeah, Learn to Fly. Hook Me Up, A New Revolution. This is recorded in 1999. Hook Me Up, A New Revolution, because this one is a lie. We sat around laughing and watched the last one die. How can you possibly hear that song even with a passing interest and not realize, oh, that's Dave Grohl. That's him singing his lyrics about being in Cobain's band for the umpteenth time. In a dozen or more compositions. As I'm saying, I'm talking about the majority of his output that makes it to radio airplay, which is obviously the biggest promotional avenue for him, and of course a big revenue generator, as these things are played day after day after day, year after year after year, because he's in that hard rock radio rotation. But in terms of recycling all this sentimentality, as I say, the number one song played 1,089 times according to Setlist FM, is Everlong. And it does stand out as the most effective recording by the Foo Fighters band. It's just one of those things like, if you don't like Aerosmith and you hear Walk This Way come on the radio, you think, oh well, that's the one time they got the formula right, right? And I think a lot of people react to Everlong that way as well. You know, the soft lyrics are done with effective sentimentality, and then there's that shouting chorus, and that works well with it. And it seems to be conveyed with a sort of true sense of feeling. And you may recognize these lyrics. Hello, I've waited here for you, Everlong. What is this about? I mean, what does the word Everlong mean? Well, obviously this is about a rendezvous of some sort. It would be really difficult to deny that, wouldn't it? If this is about some sort of love affair or sexual affair that he's having with someone, and it's apparently illicit or secret. Hello, I've waited here for you, Everlong. Rendezvous. Secret rendezvous, you may infer. I'm over my head. Out of her head, she sang. And I wonder when I sing along with you. This is the really sentimental bit. If everything could ever be this real forever, if anything could ever be this good again, the only thing I'll ever ask of you, you've got to promise not to stop when I say when. Which seems like a conspicuous reference to the girl with the most cake. It's the same lyrical idea. These people are selfish and greedy, and this is one of the primary character elements that they share in common. Greed and selfishness. You gotta promise not to stop when I say when. She sang, breathe out, so I can breathe you in, hold you in. When I sing along with you. So if you listen to any of that type of rock and roll radio, I'm sure you recognize these lyrics. And you can size them up for what they are, which is, he ain't singing about Kurt Cobain, that's for sure. She is obviously the person he's singing along with. And I think it's been variously interpreted that this was an ode to his first wife, Jennifer Youngblood, who is a photographer, and there's no indication whatsoever she ever engaged in any public singing, which is, why I think they had another backstory developed on this to cover for the fact that the first wife, whom he divorced after about 3 years in 1997, was perhaps not the subject of the song. So they pulled along this other backstory involving a singer named Louise Post. And she gave an interview, I think this is in Australia or somewhere, out of the English and American mainstream just a couple of years ago, commenting on how perhaps she is or is not, but more or less confirming that she believes she is in some way the subject of the Foo Fighters' greatest hit, Everlong. And so that's an odd discrepancy. There was also tape of Grohl himself giving a heartfelt conveyance of how he wrote the song and why he wrote the song. And I believe, without getting super specific, he leans toward interpreting this, leading you to an interpretation that it's about his wife and not the gal he was perhaps cheating with. which led to his breakup, which is this Miss Post, I believe is that element of the soap opera. Not that I'm endorsing that in any way as being factually accurate. But Louise Post is an odd character in this whole drama for reasons that are kind of esoteric, but they're going to play into the fifth hour that I do on this, which is, how much contrivance has there been by the suits, record company execs, and deep thinkers on matters of the rock and roll industry, or controlling the minds of the masses, or however you might want to interpret this. How much has Don Draper and J. Walter Thompson had a hand in developing aspects of the Nirvana story? Because, there are broad issues regarding their territoriality in these areas. And, I'm smiling and trying to have a bit of a satirical edge to this, but as you'll see as we go on, this is all serious as all heck. Bear in mind that, Cobain's death in '94 was prior to the rise of the Sackler family's opioid distribution empire and the hundreds of thousands of deaths of Americans from, what is lumped together as both opioid suicide and opioid overdose. Hundreds of thousands of deaths. There's probably been something of a diminishing of the astonishing level of deaths in recent years. However, it was the AMA establishment that created this mess, and I doubt that they've really curtailed things by a 90% degree. Ultimately, the deaths from opioids in the United States, I haven't seen this officially, but it seemed to me the last time I looked at this 3 or 4 years ago that the trend was on track to possibly total 1 million Americans dying in this lengthy opioid crisis. So we keep on smiling as we're describing most of this, but it is all serious as hell, as, let's say, a public health issue. And what I'm saying is that if there's territoriality in these matters, in how popular culture is handled, Donnie Draper and his buddies, I'm referring to them in a metaphorical sense, obviously. The deep thinkers in pop culture and its crossover with possibly governmental mind control seem to have been active in this, or at least there's a depth of motivation that can be seriously examined here, which plays into, as I say, why was Studio 666 released 660 months and 6 days, or 5 days, after Cobain's birth. Are they really planning these things that thoroughly? And ultimately, is there really a substantial denial concept that one could formulate? Because there's no central party really to address in terms of getting anyone to issue a denial. The king of the record industry? I can't imagine him answering our phone calls. But so anyway, the interesting thing about Louise Post is she was one of the two leaders of the Veruca Salt band. This is a band that sort of sprang up out of nowhere, actually sprang up out of Chicago in 1994. And you may remember their very indie-looking Seether video was their first hit off their first long-playing CD. They claimed that the band kicked off in 1992, but according to a website that seems to accurately compile these gig records by bands, they didn't have a gig until in Chicago, 1994, where they originated. And they videotaped this Seether video out on Milwaukee Avenue, west of the Chicago downtown, in front of an art gallery. It's pretty primitive. If they didn't have a bunch of cats running around in the video, it would have been sort of almost too primitive to have any appeal. Although the central appeal really of the band is that these gals, who are Nina Gordon and Louise Post, they're in their late 20s. They're graduates of very pricey liberal arts colleges, one in Massachusetts, one in New York City, Manhattan. And in their late 20s, they formed this band, and there's some seriously skinny gals who can definitely pass for being in their late teens instead of their late 20s. And they seemed ideal to be plugged into this idea that grunge was sprouting up all over the place, even west of downtown in Chicago, Illinois. And here's the really curious thing, playing on a sort of Studio 666 concept, without placing any blame on Ms. Post, Ms. Gordon, or a mysterious Ms. Taylor who's involved in introducing them. Were these people manipulated into playing a curious role in the Nirvana story simply because, without any real detail being conveyed, Nina Gordon and Louise Post were introduced by one Lily Taylor, Queen of the Indies, a person who's appeared in many indie films and big budget films, and is generally recognized as being a favorite of critics. And as I say, no reason to consider her in any way blameworthy for what I'm about to describe, but she did introduce these people according to what is apparently the official story for the band. Ms. Gordon went to high school in Chicago, she says, or her biography says, but a lot of people in the Chicago burbs refer to their burb as in Chicago. Ms. Taylor went to school in the northern suburbs, was a student at the Piven Actors Studio or Academy, whatever they call that, went to New Trier High School, which I think is in Highland Park in the northern suburbs. And here's the real kicker, Lily Taylor. How did she become a movie star, even with some obvious talent, when so many with obvious talent also fail to break into the movie star business? Well, here's a curious fact. Born February 20th, 1967. Does that date ring a bell at all? Well, perhaps it will. That's also the exact birth date of Kurt Cobain. Aberdeen, Washington. Miss Taylor's birthplace was Glencoe, Illinois, a northern suburb, an upscale northern suburb. So somehow she's credited with introducing these people, and then really, at a very young age, 1988, she breaks into the movies in a very big way with a film called Mystic Pizza that still gets a lot of airplay and attention, particularly because it features Julia Roberts in one of her earliest roles, and a very substantial role. And as I recall seeing the film years ago, Ms. Taylor gets almost an equal share of screen time. And then, speaking of being the date that you're born on, she's also cast in the Oliver Stone film Born on the 4th of July the following year, in 1989. Their album came out September of 1994, and then a little more than a month later, it was somehow acquired and re-released by Geffen Records, DGC, as I believe it was called at that time. So they re-released it in November, and just a mile or so down the road here on 5th Avenue, or actually is it on 5th? It's 5th or 3rd. You got the Moore Theater, and appearing with Courtney Love on the 14th of November as the lead-off act when she appeared on that rather infamous occasion. Infamous for a variety of reasons, especially the issuing of 3 death threats at Muwa, caught on tape, as I've referred to in previous editions years ago. And, according to this website that compiles the gigs of these bands, they only had 7 dates reported prior to hooking up with Who. And then I believe they had 7 or 8 dates with Hole. So this was their big break in the music business, getting to tour with Courtney Love and Who. As I recall, they were actually, one of the 2 singers was accosted by Channel 4, who asked her some question relevant to the Cobain situation. And one of the singers had to say, this would be Ms. Gordon or Ms. Post, well, how would I know? I'm not Courtney Love, she said. She said, or she sang, right? And this is relevant because she is now the fall person. She is the person that David Grohl can point to and say, well, if you don't think, if it's distasteful to people that I'm singing about my wife, here I'm singing about my mistress. Or if the other way around, if he's being exploitative of his wife, who's not, ex-wife, who's not in show business really, then you can pin it on the mistress. And of course, the thing that we're really getting at here, those of you who have really vivid memories of those mid-90s may recall the Everlong video being really a stunner for one particular reason. First of all, it might have jumped out at you that this was better songwriting than Mr. Grohl typically practiced. But the real shocker was the Courtney Love character in the film, in the video. There's a person who just jumps off the screen into your eyeballs and brains as, hey, he's got Courtney Love in this video, except you look at it closely and it's actually not her, but it's a person using basically precisely the bleach blonde hairstyle that she was wearing at that time, and of course has continued to wear consistently over the last 28 years, and for several years prior to that, of course. And David Grohl is dressed in punk rock attire, leather jacket, and a chain with a padlock around his neck. Gosh, who did that? Why does that ring a bell with us? Well, it's because the only other person of note who ever attired himself with that accessory was Mr. Simon Ritchie, also known as Sid Vicious, who, famously and infamously died along with Nancy. I don't recall if his expiration was at the Chelsea Hotel, but hers definitely was, and it was reportedly quite bloody. It's not really understood whether Sid did the crime or not. He was using heavy drugs and prone to nodding off on a regular basis at that time. So, obviously, Kurt Cobain, he would often check into hotels using the Simon Ritchie pseudonym. He enjoyed the comparisons between Sid and Nancy and Kurt and Courtney, particularly because she was in the movie, the Sid and Nancy movie. In fact, she was considered for the lead, which went to Chloe Webb. And, you know, sizing up the two actresses, you can see how she must have been legitimately in the running up until the end. So they gave her a bit speaking part, and she's in some publicity stills along with Mr. Oldman and Ms. Webb. Courtney Love is definitely in that movie. Courtney Love definitely came within an inch of landing the big part. So when you see David Grohl wearing the padlock and chain, it's immediately referential to that. And in the video, by the way, the Courtney Love character is played by new bandmate Taylor Hawkins, who didn't really even play on this cut, not in the album version anyway. He was new to the band, and it's a weird drama where David Grohl, the punk Sid Vicious guy, rescues not really a Nancy Spungen type, but a Courtney Love type very specifically, from these bully teddy boys who are sort of manhandling her. And then as the plot of it goes along, she calls him on the phone, and he has to come out and rescue her again, and he beats up and kills the teddy boys. And then the Courtney Love character and the David Grohl character dispose of the bodies by throwing them into a body of water. So you can see what an odd and startling bit of music video history that is, that I've never seen anyone comment on, but golly, that really is disturbing, isn't it? These people have supposedly been feuding for years and years over money and many other issues. And yet it's really not at all clear that there is a feud that exists. That is, we started off we started off today's extemporaneous monologue dealing with the concept of spiracy. And it is upon spiracy that we continue to delve. This is a rather famous bit of interview from 1999. Or 99, or no, it's not 99, it's... I don't have the date on this one, but it was past 99. It was well into the 2000s. On the Howard Stern Show, Courtney Love, oh yeah, all of you who love Dave and all things Foo, Dave, I have to tell you, Kurt hated you. Stern, really. CLC hated his guts. Stern. Kurt hated Dave. CLC, 5 years I've been quiet about this. Okay, it was 1999 apparently. 5 years I've been quiet about this. Stern, really. CLC hated his guts. Stern, you're telling me Kurt Cobain, CLC hated his guts. Stern hated Dave Grohl. CLC, not the first year. Stern, no, he liked him at first because he wouldn't have put him in the band if... CLC, because he was funny. Stern, right. CLC, he was sweet, funny, lovely, and then he turned into such a dick. Stern, how so? CLC, this whirlwind of success was happening for Dave, and he really turned his back on Kurt. Not me. Forget about me. I didn't have a relationship with him, except for the 1 week he chased me around LA because he thought I was hot. Stern, right. He wanted to have sex with you. CLC, I just think he was really intrigued by me. Like, Stern, do you think he would have had sex with you if you had said yes and he would have done it behind Kurt's back? CLC, no, I wasn't going out with Kurt yet. Oh, you weren't. CLC, no, I was going out with Billy. So are you seeing the issue here? Maybe not in full, but This is the Ozerod book, the one that's been available since 1993. Around December of 1990, Courtney and Dave became friendly through Dave's former girlfriend, Jennifer Finch. Quote, she was fun to talk to. If you were bored, you could spend 3 hours on the phone, Dave says of Courtney. Quote, it was funny because I had never talked to anyone who was so entertainment business-wise or LA-wise as Courtney. It was kind of neat to have a conversation with someone you could picture being behind a desk at Us Magazine or something. End quote. And then during this time was when Courtney Love gave David Grohl the infamous heart-shaped box, which perhaps did or did not contain intoxicating substances. And my understanding of the narrative is that at that time, David Grohl gave it to Kurt Cobain, and Kurt Cobain did not respond to Courtney Love's overture. And yet, they did not meet for another 6 months at the Los Angeles Palladium, May of 1991. Where they both started punching each other rather famously. Such a meet-cute story. But you see the problem there. Courtney Love says they met and knew each other pretty much 6 months before the date that she says that they met in other versions of the story, and that he was chasing her around, and that, you know, obviously her reputation is not that of monogamy for many reasons. So if she was dating Billy Pumpkin and David Grohl was interested in shagging anything that moves, which was sort of his reputation from way back when, a David Grohl and Courtney Love shagathon during those 6 months was certainly possible, if not likely. Although obviously neither of them, no party has offered that this was the case. But that does complicate things, does it not? Anyway, we're running fresh out of video here. The time is 5:26. And we'll pick up in edition number 5 on another day, sometime soon, with more material along these lines. More about Jay Walter, more about the manipulation of the masses, and a significant amount bolstered by the research of several others into related areas of, you know, Central Intelligence in Hollywood, etc. So we'll be describing the CIFA and its involvement in American popular culture and how this might impinge on our situation at this time, and the mysterious demise of Taylor Hawkins in that CIFNA stronghold of Bogota, Colombia, active there since the Kennedy administration on a continual basis. You don't develop an effective narco-terrorist state without expert help from advisors. So 5/27, 29th of October, 2022. Party on way.